Is watching your division rivals in the playoffs actually boring? Let's discuss with my guest next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. And also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. And this episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right state can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. So the Cleveland Guardians and the Detroit Tigers, they played 8 innings of playoff baseball yesterday where no one scored a run. Might be throwing to some, but boring to others, like my guest, Noah Phalen from SoxOn35th.com. He tweeted that out, and he is here to talk about seeing the Royals also in the playoffs, along with the Sox manager search and who should be voted off the island, well, the White Sox roster. And Noah, why is watching the Guardians and the Tigers in the playoffs so boring?
Look, when I tweeted that, I didn't fully realize that Tarek Skubal was on the hill. So he, Tarek Skubal has a way of making the game entertaining, but you look at the Guardians just brand of baseball and it's just ugly. And it's what the White Sox tried to do this year. The scrappy, take the extra base, slap singles around the infield and, play defense and hope we score enough runs for our pitching staff. So the Guardians do that. The Tigers do that. I mean, you look up and down the Tigers roster and they're not exactly over the top with great hitters. I mean, Riley Green's pretty good. Torkelson's got some power. Other than that, it's like, who are these guys? Like, if you're not closely following baseball, you probably don't even recognize a lot of the names in there. So for me, it's just like not exactly the kind of baseball that I would like to turn on. And, when you think of October, you think of, exciting atmosphere, fun, back and forth games like the series the Mets and Phillies have been playing has been awesome to watch. Sunday's game was one of the best baseball games I've watched in a long time. And you just aren't getting that out of the Tigers and the Guardians and the Royals. And so for me, it's like, I'll check the scores, but I'm not going to sit down and watch, 9+ innings of scrappy defense and slap singles all over the field.
Yeah, and I'm also waiting for my thank you note from at least the Kansas City Royals and the Detroit Tigers fan base, because neither team might not be in the playoffs. Not to say that they're not good teams, they are, but they might not be in the playoffs had they not played the White Sox so much, because I believe their record was, what was it? The Royals were only like one game above 500 against the entire league, and the Tigers were under. I mean, shouldn't they be sending us a thank you note instead?
Yeah, both of them. I remember seeing that stat, like basically 500 teams against everyone else except the White Sox. So it's like, Chris Getz said, thank goodness we play in the AL Central. Well, I think the rest of the AL Central is saying, thank goodness the White Sox play in the AL Central right now. So,
yeah. Do you find the narrative that the Sox would be a bit better had they not had to play the Guardians, Tigers, and Royals all year? Do you think that has some merit, or are they just still historically awful?
I think they're bad, whatever division you put them in, man. I mean, what teams did they play well against? They won a series against the Rays. They won a series against the Cardinals, Oakland, but those are just, one-off series that
Don't forget the Braves, man.
yeah, every baseball
Even
team
though they needed a game
has a
rained out.
lucky couple games.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I don't think it matters what division you put them in. I think you could put them in AAA in the International League, and they'd maybe be 500. They're that bad. So.
Yeah, and even if the White Sox somehow wanted to spend in the offseason, isn't it impossible for the team to have that Royals turnaround because they don't have a player like Bobby Witt Jr.?
No, I mean, the closest thing they have is Luis Robert, and he did not have a good season this year. He was not healthy all year. He just did not look like himself at the plate. So maybe he bounces back and maybe he becomes a Bobby Witt Jr. type player like we know he can be, but I just don't see. I mean, they're not really in the same category.
Yeah, now you do write some excellent content for SoxOn30fit.com. You've probably watched a ton of games. So does Luis Robert Jr. look broken to you? Did the losing break him?
Well, it's hard. They always say that hitting is contagious in baseball, and it really is true. There a lot of the success over a season that's as long as the Major League Baseball season is about energy and it's about chemistry. And when you have a locker room where everybody's struggling, like it's really hard to just be the one guy that carries that entire load. It puts a lot on you mentally. And so it wouldn't surprise me if some of that did play a factor in Robert having a down year. Just the idea of, oh man, I have to be the one guy that carries this offense. It's a lot to carry.
So, I want to get back to you saying about being the Cleveland Guardians and scrappy, and I'm not trying to totally pile on Luis Robert Jr. here, but his basically failure to be like a Jose Ramirez, do you think that kind of just got in the way of being able to be this team that they envision? Or should they have just been like how Garrett Crochet said, we're not Cleveland. Let's not be Cleveland anymore.
Yeah, I think Crochet was onto something. I think at the beginning of the year, if you would have asked me what's the vision for the 2024 White Sox, I think they saw themselves as Cleveland. We're a team that's gonna get all these pitchers. We're gonna get them in Brian Bannister's lab, and we're gonna get them throwing the ball well. Luis Roberts going to be our Jose Ramirez, and you know what? The rest of the team, if they just get on base, play good defense, we'll find a way to score. We'll find a way to win. The problem is you're kind of the Walmart brand of the Cleveland Guardians in the sense that, your on base guys are not getting on base. The defense guys are not playing defense like they should be. And Luis Robert did not have a Jose Ramirez type season. Far from it.
I love how you say Walmart brand. I'd almost say like dollar store brand. I mean, that was just, they were going to the scraping at the bottom of the barrel when you're grabbing Nicky Lopez and Paul DeYoung and thinking like Paul DeYoung's glove is going to save your defense. And then it turns out, well, he found his hitting stroke, but now he's not able to hit, play defense. And Nicky Lopez, who's 3 years removed from his career season. I mean, that to me is like the dollar store right there. Speaking of which, would you have foreseen Paul DeYoung and Tommy Pham being a few games away from being in the ALCS after being nowhere near playoff contention when they were with the team in July?
Yeah, baseball is something, man. I knew that they were probably going to get traded to a contender. When I saw that they got traded to the Royals, I figured, maybe they make the playoffs. But for some reason, that Royals team keeps winning, and that Tigers team keeps winning, and I can't explain it. I really can't. They've got a bunch of pieces that fit together really well, and it works. And I'm happy for Tommy and Paul. I don't think either one of them really thought they would be where they're at when they signed with the White Sox this season, but good for them.
I love Tommy Pham too, but do you think time was wasted by playing him? Because I just think that there was this false belief that they sign him, he'll bring in some veteran leadership, which he showed by example. But we can also they could also get a better return than the Mets did last year. And it turns out he's just a throw in a 3-team trade.
Yeah, I think the idea was, exactly what you said. He comes in, gives you a leader, gives you a guy who can take major league quality at bats and should be an example for some of these young guys. And then you flip him at the deadline and you get something. It didn't work out that way. And I guess it's hard to tell what offers were on the table for Chris Getz, whether he could have actually gotten a legit piece for Tommy Pham. I don't know. But I feel like the value that he provided was probably not worth, costing at bats for guys that potentially could be here, like Dominic Fletcher and guys like that.
Yeah, like the one thing that when I was watching the September White Sox, I was like, gosh, we just wasted a whole summer of Dominic Fletcher's, at least his elite defense. I don't know if he's going to ever be a good hitter. I don't know. I think he might just be Adam Engel, but still, I would have rather seen him catching the ball in the outfield. And then I watched Zach DeLoach get on base, and I'm like, again, I don't know if he's going to be a good hitter, but you could use some guys that get on base. And it was just like, man, we wasted so much time for a guy that was probably going to get you nothing more than a lottery ticket. Yeah, I don't know what offers they got, but I think they had this feeling that, well, we're going to get better than what the Mets got. And it's like, you're gonna just get a lottery ticket, which is fine. Go get the lottery ticket. Don't throw them into a trade,
Yeah, I think in hindsight, had you known that the season was going to be as bad as it would have been, maybe you don't go get someone like Nicky Lopez. Maybe you don't sign Tommy Pham, and you give those guys, your Lenyn Sosas, your Dominic Fletcher, Zach DeLoach. You give those guys at bats because obviously hindsight's 2020. But when you have a season that's as big of just a flop as this season was, like, you're looking for anything that can kind of be encouraging for your future. So if you give a guy like that a full season of at bats and he holds his own, then you can look at it and be like, we may have lost a lot of games, but we found a right fielder or, second baseman. And now you're kind of going into next year with the same questions. Can Dominic Fletcher be an everyday player? Is Zach DeLoach going to be anything? Can Lenine Sosa be a starting second baseman? And I feel like those are questions you could have answered this year if you had kind of accepted the fact that you weren't going to be good and didn't try to, make these savvy veteran signings to win a few extra games.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. All right, those familiar with the show know until the Sox hire a manager or lift the interim tag off of Grady Sizemore, I want to get every guest's take on who they think the next manager should be. So let's get Noah's next on Locked On White Sox. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page when you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel is amazing for parlays, props, and futures. I mean, the traditional spreads, over, under, and money lines are also great on FanDuel, but it's the parlays, props, and futures that make using America's #1 sportsbook so much fun. And Americans, yeah, we don't like ties, but FanDuel has a plus 290 for the Bears and Jaguars, ending the first quarter in a tie. So you can put $10 on that, and if it hits, you can nearly triple your money. Any team any team that beats the Brewers in the playoffs usually has gone on to the World Series. The Mets are at plus 420 to win the National League pennant, $10 there, and it hits, you can win $42. And I believe the Mets are up now 2-1 in that series. So, that might be worth taking a look at. So that's FanDuel.com. And the Chicago Blackhawks start their regular season. Well, they started their regular season yesterday. Too bad it's on the road, and us Hawks fans have to wait until mid-October for the first Blackhawks game. That gives you plenty of time to use the Game Time app to find a great seat to see Connor Bedard at the best price possible. Also, Bulls preseason is starting off, and soon the regular season will be in full swing, and you should use the Game Time app for your ticket needs. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Also, be on the lookout for amazing deals on great events. For example, they had 50% off tickets for the Dodgers and Diamondbacks this past Labor Day. That's a good deal for two pretty good teams going at it at the time. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts, as Locked On White Sox is available at places such as Apple and Spotify. Back here with SoxOn35th.com's Noah Phalen. And Noah, again, where can we always find your great content?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at NoahP245. And then, of course, writing for Sox on 35th, like you said. Also doing some stuff for Pipeline to 35th, which is the minor league side of Sox on 35th. So I'll always plug their content. All the other guys over at Sox on 35th are great guys and gals, actually. And so give them a follow as well at Pipeline to 35th, at Sox on 35th. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the sites that every White Sox fan should be hitting up. It's part of my rotation, SouthsideSox.com, Sox on 35th. I do write for a little site called, Southside Showdown. You can check that out every now and again. But, and Sox Machine, you guys all do the Lord's work from the 108, all doing the Lord's work here. All right. So, Noah, before I ask, who is your choice for the team's next skipper? What characteristics are you looking for in the team's next manager?
So I'm looking, first of all, for somebody outside the organization. I like the idea of somebody coming from an organization that has a track record of success. And that doesn't mean the Kansas City Royals. I'm not pointing to the 2015 World Series and saying, see, track record of success like they did with Pedro Grifol. I like the idea of getting someone from a team like the Dodgers, a team like, Tampa Bay, one of those teams that's constantly in the playoffs, that's great at developing players, because I think that really is the next phase of this for the White Sox is they got to develop some of these players. They got to take some of these young major leaguers and minor leaguers that they have and turn them into something. Because it doesn't sound like there's going to be the checkbook opened anytime soon. So, got to make your own talent at home. So, yeah, that's my main thing. Someone that can develop players and someone that comes from an organization that knows how to develop players.
All right, hold on. You mentioned the Royals, though. Hold on, my friend here. Uh, a bench coach on the Royals currently ties to the Rays, Paul Hoover. What do you think about that? What if he got an interview?
Well, his background isn't really with the Royals. I like the Rays ties. So if he's been with the Royals for a couple of years with Matt Quatraro, I think that's okay. I think a guy like Pedro Grifol, who was a lifelong Kansas City Royal, is probably what I'm looking to avoid.
Yeah. Anybody who sat next to the seat of Ned Yost, you should run as far away from as possible. I covered Ned Yost when he was in Milwaukee, and trust me, the guy, Ned Yost was good for, like, again, if you're a rebuilding team that's hit rock bottom, he can establish a culture, but that's all he can do. And especially you want to run away from people who think that they know everything about baseball, like everything and anything, and that if you had a differing opinion, how dare you? So if you study at the seat of that guy, run away from him as far away as you can. What did you think of the job that Grady Sizemore did?
Like, it's really hard to tell. I mean, obviously, the win-loss record is not really going to reflect the kind of job that Grady did because you can only manage the team that you're given. I know they kind of went on a little run at the end of the season. They won 5 of their last 6, and Grady has a pretty good reputation among the players. A lot of the players spoke really highly of him. Um, he was a lot more noticeably more fiery than Pedro Grifol was. You would see him coming out and arguing about calls. You rarely saw that from Pedro. You constantly saw him kind of hyping guys up in the dugout, getting them ready to go out there. So all of that is positive. I just the idea of just promoting from within. It's what they did for the GM job. It just feels like that's not the right way to go about this. And maybe they do cast a wide net and do a ton of interviews and they settle on Grady Sizemore. I can respect that a little bit more than, well, we didn't really do too much of a search. We just promoted this guy because he did a fine job.
Yeah, my fear is that, like, that last week, while hey, it's nice to win because wins were rare. You played a team that basically had quit, and then you also won 2 games from a team that was actually probably severely hungover on one of those days, and another that was just like, okay, let's just not get hurt. My fear is they are going to be able to rationalize that, hey, he's cheap and he's willing to do the job. I don't
Mhm.
know what you think about that.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot. They really are. They're coming off literally the worst season in history. I can't imagine that it's a super attractive job to potential managerial candidates. But the one thing that does work in their favor, I think, is there really are not a lot of jobs open this offseason, especially with the Reds kind of jumping the market, getting Terry Francona. I mean, that was probably the best job available. And now you're down to the White Sox and the Marlins. That's really, unless some other jobs come open later, which I don't really see happening. I mean, those are your only really managerial openings. So if there is a guy who's, kind of ready to take that next step and become a manager this offseason, he doesn't really have too many options. So that could work in their favor. But you could also see people that are, bench coaches or whatnot on good teams just say, you know what, I'll stick around one more year and I'll wait for a more attractive opening. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much interest there actually is in their job, and then to see what kind of person they're looking for to take them out of what has been an unprecedented slump.
Yeah, I think if they do end up landing on Grady Sizemore, if they cast a wide net, that'll give you an indication that if they did a big search, that a lot of guys said no, that they're just going to wait for the next cycle. Because I could see Skip Schumacher, their top target, doing that. Um, who would be your pick then to be the next skipper if you were the GM?
Well, I've heard the name Clayton McCullough a lot. I think Bruce Levine from 670 The Score brought that name up a few weeks ago. He's interesting. I just see the Dodgers on his resume, and that automatically makes him interesting. I know that he is a guy that Shohei Ohtani has really spoken highly of. He's kind of been Ohtani's guy since he came over to the Dodgers. So, um, obviously, if we could have a guy that's as good as Ohtani, that would be great. But uh, yeah, that's an interesting name. The idea of Skip Schumacher, I don't think is bad. He won Manager of the Year a year ago, so that's. I don't put a whole lot of stock into the Marlins this season. They were super injured. I mean, their entire rotation, I think, was on the IL by like May. So I don't put a ton of stock into that. I think Skip kind of brings a good fire to the game, a good energy. My only concern is that it sounds like it might be a Tony La Russa hire, and I think we've had enough of those, if you ask me. But I think either one of those I would be intrigued by, and I'd be happy with. A couple names that I brought up. I hopped on the Sox on 35th podcast a couple months ago, and I had a couple of names. Jeff Bannister was one of the names that I brought up. He's, I believe, the bench coach for the Diamondbacks right now. Had some experience managing. He was the Rangers manager for a few years. He took them to the playoffs a couple times. John Gibbons is another name that I've heard. He's with the Mets right now. He's their bench coach. Spent a lot of time managing the Blue Jays during kind of their golden era with Bautista and Encarnacion, those guys. So those are a couple guys that I think are experienced managers that might be looking to get back into it that I would be intrigued by because they're more of, Liam Hendricks said the Sox need an authoritarian. I kind of agree. When you have a young team, you need a guy who's going to lay down the law and tell them, this is how things work on my teams and in my clubhouse. And it's you do this or you're gone kind of thing. So I think either one of those guys would be a really intriguing hire as well.
Yeah, and I like how you did bring up those guys because again, they're outside the organization, but they actually have ties to the people that are in the organization that hopefully are running things. You got Barfield, with the Diamondbacks tie, and then Gibbons was actually Chris Getz's last manager. So I saw that as well. With his ties, I think it was John Greenberg who wrote that Gibbons has ties to Getz on there, and yeah, it's a veteran manager. So I like those names. Clayton McCullough. The only thing that scares me is just, and maybe it's, maybe he is a very good manager, and you can never go wrong with guys that have ties to the Dodgers and the Rays. But just being a first base coach, kind of. But at the same time, what is one of the worst things that the White Sox are at? Running the bases, and he is their base. He's the Dodgers base running coordinator, and Shohei Ohtani magically just started stealing 50 bases. So I don't know. That could work. All right, so Noah has a relative currently on Survivor, his brother. While he can't disclose what happened, he can tell us he would vote off the Sox Island, at least, off the roster. So let's discuss that next on Locked On White Sox. This episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.com. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. The Guardians and the Tigers, as we've been talking about on this show, they're facing each other in the ALDS, and if you want to root against both teams, maybe taking the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or tour Motown, on a last-minute trip to go boo them at Detroit, for example, use Booking.com to book your next stay. Or, hey, maybe root against the Kansas City Royals, take a little trip out to KC, get some barbecue, and check out the Negro League Museum. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home team's or rival's stadium. No matter what team you are rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city, from hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays. Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter, here with SoxOn35th.com contributor Noah Phalen. And Noah, again, your brother Sam, was he on the previous Survivor? I'm losing track. I think I saw on Twitter that he was on the current season. I haven't watched Survivor in probably about 20 years, so I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, he's on season 47, which is currently airing. It'll be airing now through like December sometime. So Wednesday nights, 7 p.m. Central on CBS and Paramount Plus.
All right. Well, I'm not going to ask you for any spoilers because I'm sure you guys are sworn to secrecy. You can't say a darn thing. But we could play who are you going to get rid of? Sox players, survivor style. So I'm going to give you, a couple of names here and just tell me who are you going to vote off and maybe why. Let's go with Andrew Vaughn or Gavin Sheets. Who's getting voted off?
It's got to be Gavin Sheets for me. I know he played pretty well at times this season, but he's just not consistent. Andrew Vaughn at least will give you league average offensive production, which for where he was drafted is pretty disappointing. But, it's one of those times where you're not going to be great, so throw him out there and maybe he'll finally take that big step forward that we've all been kind of waiting for 3 years. But Gavin Sheets he doesn't really do anything for me. He can't hit lefties. He isn't very good defensively. I would not be I'd have no qualms with them cutting ties with him.
Yeah, you get 450 at bats and just hit 10 home runs. He's got pop is to me a complete myth. Andrew Vaughn or Andrew Benintendi?
Andrew Benintendi looked like a good player in the second half. I don't know what happened. He started pulling the ball more like end of May, beginning of June, and he was a completely different guy in the second half. So I'm keeping him. I'm getting rid of Andrew Vaughn in that situation. You can non-tender Vaughn and save yourself like $5 million or something that'll help you pay off the giant contract you gave Andrew Benintendi. So, if he keeps up whatever he did in the second half, he might actually be a productive player next year.
All right, Dominic Fletcher, Zach DeLoach, or Oscar Colas?
Oh, man. I feel bad because Oscar Colas, I don't feel like has ever really gotten a shot outside of that first month last year where he was basically starting every day in right field. I feel like he hasn't really gotten a shot to, show what he can do offensively. But I've got to go with him. I think Dominic Fletcher has shown you enough on defense to show that he's a valuable player. I think Zach DeLoach's contact skills are legit. I think Oscar Colas probably has the most power of the three, but he has not been able to consistently put it together. So I've got to go with him.
All right, Miguel Vargas or Jacob Amaya?
Oh, man. Miguel Vargas is going to have to stay because that's the only way that I can justify that trade at the deadline. Amaya did all right down the stretch, but he's really a defense guy. He's always kind of been a defense first guy coming up. Not a whole lot to like in the bat. Vargas was a top 100 prospect last year, and that's what everyone keeps saying. And he obviously didn't show it coming over to the White Sox. He actually went in like one of the worst stretches of his entire career, but you have to think the potential is there. Maybe they can unlock it. They obviously thought they could unlock it. So I'm giving him another chance. And I'm voting Jacob Amaya off.
All right, finally, Garrett Crochet or Luis Robert Jr.?
I wish we could keep both. I wish we could build a team around both. But in terms of this offseason, I am keeping Luis Robert Jr. I'm probably sending Garrett Crochet to the highest bidder just because of trade value. I think Luis Robert Jr. coming off a down year, you're not going to get as much for him as you would like. You might be better off keeping him and seeing if he can kind of bounce back and trading him at the deadline or next offseason. Whereas Crochet coming off, obviously, a breakout year, the best season of his career. He's gotten through a full season. You kind of know where the innings are at now, so there's less question marks going into next year. I think they should get a haul for Crochet if they try to move him. So that's what I'm going to go with.
All right. Well, the tribe has spoken, and that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB as our host Sully discusses the Fall Classic, and he has it covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back tomorrow with more review of those 63 players who suited up for the White Sox, especially the pitchers who should have never been there in the first place. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion with Noah Phalen. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On White Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. And Noah, again, where can we find all your outstanding content?
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at NoahP245. You can find my contributions at Pipeline 235th or at Sox on 35th as well.
Yeah, you make sure that Sox on 35th, one of the best some of the best Sox content out there. Make sure you guys are always checking it out. And again, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.